Father Tony Dosen. My topic is Catholic education and the immigrant experience. We'll be looking at the history of Catholic schooling in the United States and the process of immigration and how the two work together. And then toward the end of our talk, we're going to kind of take the theme up in a more contemporary type of way. Timothy Walk, in his 1996 book, Parish School, posits that there are 5 themes that run through the history of Catholic schools in the United States: survival, immigration, Catholic schools were not uniformly supported by Catholic parents, their parish priests, and sometimes not even the bishops, and that's throughout the history, adaptability, and community. During this presentation, I will be focusing primarily upon the themes of immigration and community. I will also touch ever so gently upon the themes of survival, lack of support, and adaptability. Further, I wish to make mention that the true heroes of Catholic schooling in the United States are the thousands of sisters from so many communities who are receiving, after receiving clerical fiat, built a system that should be declared the 8th wonder of the world. So let us speak of survival for a moment. The Catholic population of what was the United States of America in the late 18th and throughout the 19th centuries was in the minority. Anyone who has taken a survey course in European history will recognize this date, October 31st, 1517. This is the date that Martin Luther nailed the 95 Theses on the church door at Wittenberg. Luther's reforms set a wave of unrest throughout Central Europe, and then as far west as Great Britain and as far east as Poland and the territories of the Holy Roman Empire. There was a shifting of the deck, as it were, in religious practice throughout Europe, which led to civil unrest throughout the 17th and the 18th centuries. Now, while there were Catholic missionaries in Mexico, California, French Canada, and the Louisiana Territory, both Spanish missionaries and French, the impact of the Reformation hits the American shores hardest from Great Britain. The Reformation in Britain, over King Henry's desire to annul his first wife, led to his declaration that he was head of the church in England and not the Roman pontiff. So Britain became a national church. But what type of national church would it become? The influences of Calvin, Luther, and Zwingli, along with the Anabaptists, infiltrated this country. The Church of England slowly divided into a high church, which is also known as the Episcopal Church. And for those of us that kind of talk about such things, it was the Smells and Bells Church. And the Low Church, which was a much more word-based liturgy that focused on the reading of Scripture and preaching, and moved away from hierarchical structures that were part and parcel of the high church. This did not sit well with the ruling class. Thus, these low church groups began to experience persecution. The Puritans, who sought to purify the Church of England and all of its Romish ways, along with Congregationalist groups and the Anabaptists, were persecuted by the Church of England. Thus, when the opportunity arose for them to migrate to a free land and live the faith they believed freely, they came to the New World, setting up English colonies in what became known as New England. Fear of not only Catholics, but also anything that looked like it, read High Church, Church of England, made those who were once persecuted become the persecutors. Each colony was founded with a religious affiliation, and anyone who blatantly went against the religious mores of the colony would be exiled. Roger Williams, the founder of Rhode Island, was banned from the Massachusetts Bay Colony because of his contrary beliefs to those who lived in Massachusetts Bay. Maryland was the only colony that was founded as a Catholic colony. While the other colonies were not necessarily happy about that situation, they did live in some sort of relative peace. The Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and Rhode Island were the only colonies that, that declared freedom of religion before the American Revolution. It was not until 1839 that the questions of religion and education came to the fore. Horace Mann, known as the father of the common school system, in 1838 outlined some problems of the public school in the Common School Journal. These were pretty straightforward. The public school the public should no longer remain ignorant. That such education should be paid for, controlled, and sustained by the interested public. That this education will be best provided in schools that embrace children from a variety of backgrounds. That this education must be non-sectarian, and that this education must be taught using the tenets of a free society. Finally, that education should be provided by well-trained professional teachers. The development of the common school in Massachusetts, while secular in nature, was imbued with a moral foundation based on the Bible. In essence, Horace Mann did not create a sectarian school, but rather a religiously neutral, generically Christian school. The idea of a totally secularized school was not palatable to the Protestant majority. Mann therefore made use of the Bible as a text in the classroom. The biblical text was common to all religious denominations. They did not attempt to teach the specific doctrines of particular denominations. Since there was no common interpretation in the Bible, following the teachings of Luther, that each person should interpret the scriptures for themselves. As the common school system developed throughout the states in the earlier part of the 19th century, Catholic clergy began to ask for an exemption in the text of the Bible that would be used in the common schools. The King James Version was chosen as the preferred biblical text for the common school, and Catholic leadership asked that Catholic students, only Catholic students, be allowed to use the Douay Rheims Bible, a text of the Catholic Bible, which was translated from the Latin Vulgate Bible and had additional books in the Bible, what the Protestants called the Apocrypha. And perhaps most importantly, it had extensive footnotes providing proper interpretation of the scriptural passages. This was especially offensive to the Protestant community, who, as we saw, believed that each person's translation was authoritative. Now, Bishops John Hughes of New York and Francis Kenrick of Philadelphia attempted to gain this exception to the Bible mandate of the common school, but their concerns were quickly dismissed. The brouhaha that arose had epithets slung from both sides, claiming Catholics is against the Bible, or Protestants' use of the King James Bible as a thinly veiled excuse to persecute Catholics. In the end, there was no resolution to the issue. While the battle raged on as a war of the Bibles, it ended with the Catholics claiming the common school was anti-religious, and the common school folk claiming that the Catholics were not just anti-Bible, but don't want to cooperate with others. Knowing that Catholic children would be under the tutelage of teachers who, despite the non-religious clause, would seek to proselytize them, Catholics eventually developed their own school system as an alternative to the public system. Most of the original teachers were laywomen who did what they could to teach the children. Communities of sisters, beginning with St. Elizabeth Ann Seton's Sisters of Charity, took on the teaching duties at many parochial schools. Shortly thereafter were other communities of sisters, including the Sisters of Loretto of Narings, Kentucky, a community founded by Father Charles Narings, a Dutch missionary to the United States. Now we move to the Irish immigrants. Communities of sisters were yet in higher demand as the potato famine raged in Ireland. This was not the only reason for the Irish to migrate to the United States. Religious conflicts, lack of political autonomy, which, by the way, was not unlike what was happening in the United States, and terrible economic conditions, especially among the poor, forced the hand of many Irish Catholics to begin anew in the United States. History tells us of the welcome that the Irish received upon their arrival. There were signs in many stores and many businesses that said, Irish need not apply. The Irish, poor, disheveled, and lacking in skills, and Catholic, became easy targets for those who had come before them. The nativist movement, a movement that said those who arrived at an earlier time than the immigrants were the true natives, and others were usurpers and unequal to those who had built this land, became an unexpected burden upon these 19th century immigrants. Now, in 1844, in the continuing battle between Catholic immigrants and their nativist neighbors, 2 Catholic churches were burnt to the ground in Philadelphia, and 12 people died as a result. Nativists continued to taunt Catholics throughout the Eastern Seaboard with threats of burning more churches. Now, the Bishop of New York, John Hughes, put armed guards around the churches of New York City. Those armed guards were basically the immigrants themselves and their parish priests using firearms. And he went to the mayor of New York and confronted this nativist-leaning mayor that if a single Catholic church were burnt in New York, the city would become a second Moscow. This was a reference to the terrible destruction of Moscow by fire just a little bit earlier in the century. Hughes, while a strong defender of Irish freedom, felt that the immigrants in his city should demonstrate their unswerving loyalty to their adopted land. Although it took until the middle of the 20th century for the United States to elect its first Catholic president, the Irish immigrants who were shunned in the public square made their way into local politics and local public service as police, firefighters, and teachers, both in the public and the Catholic schools, by the end of the 19th century. And now we look at the Germans. German immigration had an early beginning in the colonies. William Penn, the founder of Pennsylvania, recruited Germans to the New World with the promise of religious freedom in his new colony. So German Mennonites, Quakers, and Amish emigrated from Germany to their new land, settling in a part of Philadelphia that became known as Germantown. By 1832, 10,000 German immigrants arrived in the United States. And by 1854, the number grew to almost 200,000 immigrants. As this Catholic population increased throughout the 19th century, Catholic churches and Catholic schools developed around a model of curriculum that was uniquely German, American, and Catholic. Students were taught in their native German and learned the proper way to speak the language. This would not have been possible without the immigration of religious sisters from Germany to so many cities, towns, and hamlets throughout the country. The sisters, schooled in the language, culture, and faith of the immigrant community, were the 19th century equivalent of essential workers in the immigrant Catholic school system. Now, there's an editor of a German American newspaper who wrote, "Our German language is to us the treasure that is inseparable with our being. We are better citizens, better men, and better Christians if we give expression to our noblest feelings in our own tongue, unhindered. We desire to be faithful American citizens. We desire to remain devoted children of the Catholic Church. But we also desire to find an unhindered expression of the soul in our own language." This became the pattern of the immigrant Catholic schools throughout the 19th century and into the 20th century. Now, the German Triangle connected three Midwestern cities, Milwaukee, St. Louis, and Cincinnati. While one could say that the Germans settled in so many cities throughout the country, the German Triangle seems to have held strong and continues to be a stronghold for Germans today. German language studies in Catholic schools declined quickly with the start of the First World War. It is worth noting that many German Lutheran elementary and secondary schools were formed during the same time as the Catholic German schools. The sentiments regarding education and standing firm in the connection between German language and religion were very, very similar. And now we move to the Polish experience. Anyone who's lived in Chicago more than 3 days is familiar with the street name Pulaski. Casimir Pulaski and Thaddeus Kosciuszko were experienced military leaders in their native Poland, but they were recruited to the colonies by Benjamin Franklin to lead an inexperienced American army. Their expertise, combined with the will of the colonists, won the day for the fledgling nation. But the first serious wave of Polish immigrants came to the United States in the later part of the 19th century. During this time, Poland was partitioned amongst the Russians, the Prussians, and the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Despite the Eastern European drama, the Poles were quite clear about their freedom, their national heritage, and their Catholic faith. Similarly, the Slovaks from the southern part of the former Czechoslovakia found similar problems in the exercise of their faith and their freedom. Now, both the Polish and Slovaks would have a second wave of immigration from the beginning of the 20th century until the mid-20th century, with the double punch of Nazi occupation, followed by communist oppression until the 1980s. Once again, the school experiences of the Slovaks and Poles mirrored similar qualities to the German Catholic experience. The educational experience that the Slovaks and the Poles desired was a mix of religion, language, culture, and educational skills. For amalgamation into their new country was important for these communities. What the people wanted was a both and experience, American values and Polish values. It was a pride in being a hyphenated American. The Slovaks were the earlier group founding Catholic schools. However, with greater numbers of Poles migrating to the United States, the Poles quickly outnumbered the Slovak schools. And by 1910, Polish Catholic schools numbered over 350 in more than a dozen states. Once again, there was an influx of Polish sisters, both from long-standing communities and new communities, such as the Felician Sisters, who staffed these schools in the United States. One needs to understand that these immigrants were looking for an enculturation of their children and grandchildren into the Polish culture that was so threatened in the old country, the Polish language and the living faith of the people. we turn here from history to autobiography in a sense. I'm going to take a little look at the Croatian Catholic Church and the Catholic school experience. And this comes from my own experience growing up and going to a Catholic school that was predominantly Croatian. So I'd like to begin and speak kind of not just about history, but about the lived experience. And I hope that you don't miss any of the true impacts of what was important about that educational experience. And I hope that my sharing brings some of the immigrant school experience to life for you. I grew up on the southeast side of the city of Chicago. Yes, Chicago has an east side. When you get to the southern shore of Lake Michigan and the Indiana border, you suddenly have miles of east side. The place where I was born and lived was in the middle of steel mills, shipping docks, bridges, and railroad tracks. We lived near where my dad worked. When my mom, it was in the midst of the steel mills. And so when my mom would complain about the smell of the air, my grandfather would say to her, "That smell puts food on the table." My home parish, Sacred Heart, opened a new school in September 1959. The school had been going since the late 1918, 1919, and had continued. But in 1959, they built a brand new school. And that was the year that I entered kindergarten. I graduated in 1968. My parents were first generation Americans. My grandparents on both sides were born in Croatia. The church was founded in 1913 after the Croatians and Slovenians, who shared a common church about a mile away, broke apart because of disagreements. However, my grandparents were married in that Slovenian church, St. George, in 1913, before the new building of Sacred Heart was completed. By the early 1950s, Sacred Heart was, while still strongly Croatian, was starting to become a prototypical American parish, with Slovaks, Irish, Italian, and Polish Catholics joining the church. While the population diversified, at least diversified a lot from being the Croatian ghetto that it was, the various activities of the parish beyond liturgical functions still focused upon Croatian life, language, and culture. The sisters who taught at Sacred Heart, while having English as a first language, in many cases also spoke Croatian, Slovenian, or another Slavic language. As an example, I remember my mom picking me up from school at the end of the day with my grandmother. My first grade teacher, Sister Gerard, would come out to the car just to speak with my grandmother in Croatian. While we did not have language classes during the school day, at various times the parish priests would offer classes to students and adults on Saturdays. The music teacher slash choir director, Sister Elaine, taught us English hymns, Latin hymns, because it was before the council, and Croatian hymns. It never entered our mind that there would be any type of parish school celebration where we did not sing in all three languages. Among the other cultural offerings were singing societies, lessons in playing traditional folk instruments from Croatia, such as the tamburica, and learning the traditional Croatian folk dances known as the kolo. Now, the kolo is a circle dance with intricate steps that could play havoc on the uninitiated or those with the two left foot crowd. That is probably why I did not last very long in the classes. The parish school was not just the place that we went to school. It was also the place where the parish gathered. Whether it was the monthly meeting of various parish societies, the omnipresent bake sales after Sunday Mass, annual parish membership meetings, Croatian Fraternal Lodge meetings, parish dinners, celebrations, or the annual festival, the school was the center of the local community's life. If you will, we met at the school in the shadow of the church. Even in the days of growing Eastern Central Eurocentric diversity there, that we were experiencing in the 1960s in my neighborhood, I was still growing up in what I would consider a Croatian ghetto. One heard about as much Croatian spoken as one would hear English. It was not just a church, but the local stores, the bakeries, the restaurants, the taverns, the newsstands, the funeral homes. The community was held together by church, language, and culture. Sacred Heart is a small school in a poor immigrant neighborhood that in significant ways was an immigrant ghetto. It was a neighborhood that seemed closed in on itself. It was a little Croatian village that was a small part of the much larger Chicago metropolitan area. Historians and sociologists have written about the neighborhoods of Chicago. What made them work? How could a small Catholic school produce during the 1960s university professors, high school and elementary school teachers, a NASA scientist, pharmacists, nurses, lawyers, doctors, two priests, and a fairly large number of religious sisters, as well as many happily married couples and parents? It was a community focused upon school, church, and family. It was a community that worked together for something larger than themselves. It was a community of encouragement that both nourished and was nourished within families, within the church, and within the school that stood in the shadow of the church. What was built from the 20s through the 70s, 80s, and 90s was a strong community that found its anchor in the church and the parish school. Margaret Brinnig and Nicole Steele Garnett are professors of law at the University of Notre Dame. They penned a fascinating study of the impact Catholic schools have in urban neighborhoods. Their study focused upon the Archdiocese of Chicago during the administration of our own Sister Mary Paul. Their premise is that Catholic schools have an impact on urban neighborhoods. And what is fascinating about this study is that Brinnig and Garnett posit that it is not that they benefit the neighborhoods because the schools are the recipient of social capital, but rather that the neighborhoods themselves are the recipient of increased social capital. I ask that we think about that for a moment. Parishes were more than buildings in the neighborhood. According to the authors, they were the building blocks of community life. In canon law, the term parish refers not simply to a particular church, but rather to social and religious communities bound to a particular church. Brinnig and Garnett point to an interesting phenomenon. Neighborhood institutions, especially those such as Catholic schools, provide a level of stability because they are not just other people who come in and come out. The priest, some of the school staff, and here you read usually other religious, live in the neighborhood and become a part of its fiber. So why is it that we are so quick to close Catholic schools in the inner city? What type of pastoral plan do we have to engage neighborhoods of immigrants from countries and continents that white America would see as problematic, including those whose ancestors were forcefully brought to the United States as slaves? There are no quick or easy answers to this question. The facile answer is that they are not sustainable. Oftentimes, the church has forgotten that the Catholic school is a ministry and not a business. This does not mean that we do not need a solid financial plan. We certainly do. However, the financial plan is developed after a pastoral plan is determined. The money does not determine the pastoral plan. The pastoral plan determines how we make use of the money. This begs the question, what is our pastoral plan? How does the Catholic school fit into the overall mission of evangelization and mission? This is the critical question. A few years ago, I heard a certain bishop state that he would close those Catholic schools that are only serving non-Catholic children. We don't have money to run these schools. However, I've also heard two archbishops speak about Catholic education in a very different way. Cardinal Timothy Dolan, the Archbishop of New York, said about Catholic schools in non-Catholic neighborhoods, we don't educate Catholics. We educate because we are Catholic. There is the start of a mission of evangelization. Remember Jesus reading scripture in the synagogue? He read from Isaiah 61. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to bring glad tidings to the poor, liberty to captives, etc. What better good news can we bring to the poor in our large urban areas than an alternate to a failing urban public education? Now, Cardinal Bereniceus Sorafel of Vincentian, who is the Archbishop of Addis Ababa, shared with me his vision for a Catholic university in East Africa. And he said something that was startling at first to me. He says, I'm not looking to set up another theology faculty. He says, I have a very good theology faculty that is run by the Capuchins. I don't need another one. However, I want to reach the other 97% of the country who are not Eastern or Western Rite Catholic and prepare them for their lives in Ethiopian society and instill in them our values of social justice. That's incredible. Instilling into the people a sense of Catholic values and a mission of care for others, especially the poor. Here is a vision that Bereniceus saw as worthy of his archdiocese and of the Catholics of his country. What is our vision for the future? The Catholic school system in the United States began by protecting its children from the undue influence of those who would destroy the church. Later, it became a refuge for immigrants. Rather than creating a system where immigrants were Americanized, the Catholic school became a both-and system. They were both made more American and also held a deeper appreciation of their own culture from where they came. In maintaining the cultural heritage of its immigrant families, it also taught patriotism that was markedly unique. It was a fervor of God and country. Today, we stand in a new space in the United States. Immigrants who were never treated very well to begin with are once again feeling the pain of nativist movements, seeing them as uncouth, something less than the rest of us. However, the American church has the opportunity to learn from its past and to build a place where the children of the poor have the opportunity to receive support and to be successful. Where communities that are languishing because of poverty, and perhaps even worse, a lack of care on the part of the rest of society, might hear a word of hope. We are here. We are here. Brittig and Garrett talk of the social capital that spills over into the local community when there is a Catholic school in the neighborhood? Have we thought about this? Are we ready to do the sociological and theological digging that it takes to bring hope to the hopeless? This is our mission. This is building the reign of God today. After all, isn't this truly the work of the church? I want to thank you for your kind listening to my presentation, and I hope that it stirs some thoughts for you and some good conversation. And I wish you a very pleasant day and a very good time throughout the rest of this seminar. Thank you and goodbye.